Theresa Anderson. I am an interdisciplinary artist. I work with concepts around settling, softening, site conditioning, self, and a physical location site. I'm really looking at how to be more proactive rather than just a signal. So looking towards building agency. And I work with, most of my concepts are developed through performance art. So video and film is part of that. But I also, a lot of my work is sculpture and installation. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm Zoe Crosher, and I am, and I have my sound on. And I'm formerly of Los Angeles, California. I was in LA for a very long time. I do a lot of work about LA. And this was actually the project that the work in here is connected to as part of the very first project I did called Out the Window LAX. But went to Cal Arts. I deal mainly in photography, conceptual mapping, do a lot of work about sort of imaginary of going west. Originally started off, in photography and ended up sort of realizing that I'm not that interested in the materiality of photography. I'm more interested in this thing that I call the imagiatic, which is about the sort of imaginary. So it can manifest in anything. Most recently, it's manifested in bronze sculptures of discarded palm fronds from all over Los Angeles. But I am very interested in photographic concerns about archive, forgetting, memory, collection, singular histories, the fiction of a singular history. And yeah, I've been very interested in sort of relooking at older archives with this sort of aesthetic from the 70s, and constructing kind of misconstructing identity. Anyway, so my process is but I'm very much about numbers. I really like this notion of accumulation and collection, and still not being able to get to the bottom of it, no matter how many photographs you have, whether for an archive or a mapping project. I do have a studio. I sort of relocated my studio to New York. So I'm now becoming an East Coast girl to some degree, at least in terms of my practice. I'm very thankful to be here.
Are you from Los Angeles?
Complicated, no. My dad was a diplomat, so I grew up traveling abroad in all the Cold War hotspots. But my father's paternal side of the family are all old Californians. I mean, and so far as that's old. Yeah. And, but I guess my great-great-grandmother homesteaded in the 1800s after a Civil War grant that my great-great-great-grandfather had, and set up in Pear Blossom, which is deep in the Mojave while there was still water. And like my grandfather grew up in Pasadena at the turn of the last century, and my dad went to Berkeley. And so I've been connected to California my whole life, but through the imaginary of California. Yeah. I did end up going to UC Santa Cruz, and then I lived in San Francisco, and then Cal Arts in LA. But to be honest with you, I've always struggled because I've never fit into California or Los Angeles, to be honest with you. So it's interesting. But anyway, I'm very thankful to be here.
Sure. I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to always share space with other makers. So hello to you all. I'm primarily, my training is in portrait photography. So I am interested, not that it's a natural segue, but I'm interested in the politics of photography, especially through portraiture and using the figure, which has led me to really think about the concept of love within art, and a good faith question of whether or not love can it be acted out through art. And so I'm very interested in kind of sometimes the subversion of the entire practice. I'm always asking myself about my practice, my convictions and so on. So right now, I guess initially I graduated in 2015. So, there have been two big bodies of work that I've created. And so this is my second that I'm in the middle of. And it really is concerned about meeting and gathering and about collective memory as well. So I'm interested in the work that is also outside of photography, and photography as a stage in a sense. But I'm interested in kind of talking about the things that are privileged in a sense. So I'm actually at a point where I'm, on the outskirts of photography actually, and thinking about how does that look?
Yeah, happy to be here and share this virtual space with y'all. I'm a documentary photographer. I was born in a small town called Cuauhtémoc in Chihuahua, Mexico, and my parents immigrated here when I was 1 year old, so I was raised in Denver. But yeah, my work kind of revolves around this city in particular, trying to capture the people, the spirit, and kind of like the landscapes that raised me, and kind of put it in conversation with some of the social issues that are happening now. The bigger one being gentrification. And yeah, so I'm just been exploring ideas. I haven't photographed for too long. I'm going on my 4th year, so still trying to figure out my medium, trying to figure out my discipline. But through that, I've also been like into collecting and digging into archives, just to kind of broaden that conversation and looking at different vantage points, and putting it together in a virtual way, through an Instagram platform called Old Denver. And yeah, and from kind of just exploring what else I can incorporate into it, I've been experimenting with ideas, because a lot of my work deals on the street and with the community, and I've been kind of exploring ideas on how to bring that back into the streets. So I've been doing a lot of weed pasting within photography, just to kind of get it back on the street with the graffiti approach. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at right now.
I'm actually a native of Denver, and Theresa, you and Theresa live in Denver. I've worked with Theresa before. She's actually a good friend of mine. But I'm a real big fan of your Instagram account, the Old Denver account, because it really does capture a lot of the soul of Denver. A lot of people people think of Denver. They think about snow and skiing and stuff like that. But Denver does have a soul, and you capture it really well with your Instagram account.
I'd love to. It's great to be a G and be the last one in the super artist. It's never happened to me before. I just want to say thank you to everyone for being part of this, and Esteban for bringing us together. It seems almost surreal to be part of an exhibition when everything, at least in my experience, has been postponed or canceled. So it's really like, oh, I missed this. So really pleasure to meet those of you who I don't know. Alexandra Grant, artist based in Los Angeles. I'm a painter whose preoccupation has always been with language and the image. Painting has been the medium that I've expressed that in mostly. I think my interest in language has come from having parents of 2 different nationalities. And Juan, I had the commute in the other direction from you. I was born in the United States and moved to Mexico City when I was 1. So moved back and forth between Mexico and the United States as a child, which for me it was perhaps one of the greatest advantages I've been given is that bicultural childhood. So to work in photography at this time was such a gift. I've done a few photographic projects, each one so completely different, but for me, I turned this into a mental perambulation, because we really couldn't in LA. It's been very challenging with the coronavirus and the lockdown and where you can go and where you can't. So the idea of creating a narrative around the idea of home and motel was just a real gift to think about what sort of how to approach that thematically. And then Anthony, I have a love project. I just have to say that on the side. I really look forward to hearing more about yours, but I believe strongly in how we figure out how we love ourselves, how we love the people we know, and then how do we extend love to people who are very different than us, and how do we do that through art. So I just wanted to say, yeah, when you use that word, I was like, oh, great.
I say, look at her necklace.
Oh yeah, I have a
Yeah.
love
Necklace. I mean, she's wearing it. She means it. I'm telling you.
Do you want to talk a little bit more about that, the Grant Love project?
Yeah, I'm an artist in my late 40s, and have been very, very honored to have the opportunities I've had, and in those opportunities have always questioned the advantages of success in the arts, and what the position of being somewhat, successful in certain terms, what the responsibility is in a bigger picture, like how the artist can function as a member of civic society, so like an artist citizen. And so I trademarked my love symbol, inspired by Robert Indiana's the fact that he never controlled his love image, and basically started a love brand to give back to the arts. So when I'm working in a city, for example, I was at the Bemis Center for Contemporary Arts doing a residency in 2015, and I found another nonprofit called the Union for Contemporary Arts in the city that served sort of underserved populations in the north of Omaha. So I created a love edition for the Union to help benefit their community while I was there, elaborating my own work. But this year I'm going to start a grant for women in the arts. I'm doing a solo show at the Orange County Museum, and hopefully, who knows, we're going to do a pop-up shop to bring in more people of color, more minority artists into the permanent collection, because I'm really concerned how do we affect how the economics of the art world work, which can seem like such an overwhelming question. So I've sort of broken it down to say, if I'm going to do a solo show in a museum, then please give me a gift shop so that I can sell hoodies and jewelry and prints, so that we can bring in people into this collection, so more people can come in here and see themselves on the walls, or people like them. So it's for me, it's this question of how do we talk about the advantages we have as artists, and whether that comes in terms of our gender or race or economic advantage. So I'm really interested in love as a bridge. And then I also have a small publishing house that I'm very interested again in supporting other artists who might be at a transitional moment in their careers, and offering them a book that will help them on their way.
This has actually been part of my work for a very long time. It has to do with, I very much understand my privilege, and I came from a very poor, large family, and I don't speak to anyone in my family anymore. They're very racist. I have Black nephews who my family never accepted, and I just can't do it. I can't have it in my life. There's other things too, but I have a body of work, performance artworks, about making present. And typically when I do a performance art project, I choose to work with young artists, and I'm going to use the term young as people who are just starting their career, or haven't gained the momentum in their career because they don't have the economic advantages, And I do think a lot of it in the arts, a lot of it comes from that. You're going to get, like, working with young artists, you're going to get a really good cross-section, gender, race, like if you're, so I'm privileging people who I think that they're making interesting art of the time. And I kind of realized pretty early on that I would choose someone and work with them and mentor them and let them go. You know, I never really had them, so that's not a good term, but I would work with them and then all of a sudden their career would blossom. And that, you know, I've taken a lot of flack from white men in my community because I don't pay enough attention to them, and I just don't care. Like,
yeah, I actually have twofold. So I will say, like, Alexandra's been I've known Alexandra we've known each other for a very long time. And she's always been deeply connected to community and trying to figure out how to give back. And it's exciting to see you take it to this next level, Alexandra. It's really exciting. I have there's actually two ways I'm going. I'm going to start with the first one, which is that I did reach a certain level of success, and then I invariably also kind of lost it, because a lot of the nature of the art market is this sort of spit you in and then spit you out. And I come from an incredible amount of privilege, but my parents are not, you know, there's not huge money, but there's this really weird divide in the art world that I discovered where there is at this huge level of money that just freaked me out. And part of my retreat from the art world, and this is actually a little bit of my first step back into the art world after a very long absence, because I needed to try to figure out what was important, because the market got really messy and I got really frustrated by not understanding money. So I have done two things. The first is I've decided to learn about finance. And I want to create a series of, because at a certain point I was a newly divorced new mom. The gallery I'd been with had gone bankrupt. He stole all this money from me. I was completely drowning. And I was like, if I'd only had like an extra $500, it would have made all the difference in the world and it would have kept me going. And I'm learning, so I decided I'm going to learn finance because I'm tired of not having that language. And I'm especially thinking about it in terms of money going to artists and grants, because the government is not doing that. There's no market right now. And I don't know when there will be in a real way. So it's like, how do you start having income? And this notion of people do give money, but to give money more responsibly. So as opposed to giving an artist $10,000 in one big chunk that they don't know what to do with, you give it part in that and part in stocks and bonds that produce income. And it's really basic, and it's a revolution. I think it's a different way of thinking about grant giving, that sort of infrastructure, the infrastructure of the grant, there's money that can continue to give to the artist over time. You know, you might lose it, but it's also been interesting. So I've been trying to rethink that. That's also connected because I'm getting to a point now in my career where I'm still making, but I'm more interested in how do I help the women who were like me, and how do I help them survive what I didn't in a certain way. Not that things are so dire, but I really did have things did fall apart and now they're coming back together. And generally speaking, in terms of percentages, it's 10% women in collections, it's 20% women on rosters, making 30% less in general. And so I was like, okay, so where are my mentors, right? Like, because watching how the art world worked at this level, I was like, okay, how does success, and a lot of it has to do with mentorship. And I would say Alexandra was as close as I can get to a mentor, and we're more colleagues. Like, I've never had an older woman sort of have a mentorship role. And I was like, where's the old girls club, right? And so I decided to create my own. And so it's called the Painting Club. And it was meant to be, because I did grow up where politics weren't really discussed, and it's more about like having fun while trying to be politically engaged. And I think that has to do with trying to look at how women support other women, because a lot of times women traditionally have not been so kind to other women. So it's like, how do I create a space that is sort of a roaming space, that conceptual dinner parties were just to get women together in a room to make those connections.
When I talked about like love earlier, one of the things that I had to do in order to sustain an art practice was a kind of spiritual reckoning that meant that I had to really align my practice with my life, you know, and that was kind of the biggest shock coming out of art school. It was not necessarily the money situation, because I knew the money situation was there, and I knew other, or at least, you know, you read about certain artists that are really, you know, sinking under the pressure of the market. And it's not just the market, but there's also this moment where if you go to the right school and get the right people to look at your work, in a sense, then you kind of start on the fast track. Whereas if you don't, then it's a slower burn. And for some people, they can't sustain that because they don't have the money to sustain a practice, especially depending on what it is that you're making. Now, this is I'm trying to truncate as much as possible, but basically I kind of knew that, and being a photographer too, there's certain costs that come with it, especially depending on how you make work. There's equipment and camera and so on. And so for me, I was already dealing with politics, but we're all kind of playing this game, whether it's like we're playing within these institutions, whether it's the art market or even the institutions of our genres, like how we practice. Say, for instance, Juan, you know, you work in documentary. And so there's a certain kind of institutional conversation about what documentary is and how that functions, as well as kind of the conversation that I'm having with my practice, which is what do you do with the body in general? And when we bring love into it, namely specifically, the idea of love that I deal with is Black feminist theory of love that comes largely from like Bell Hooks writing, all right, which suggests that love is a continual action that edifies at least both parties involved, right? And so that really guides my work, it guides my life. And so where I am right now at this moment in time where we're dealing with the pandemic and we're dealing with uprisings, I find it disingenuous a lot of times. I really don't have time really to mess with people that don't, and I don't want to offend anybody, but like I keep saying, like, look, we can't continue to fuck with people that don't love us. You know what I'm saying? Like that's really the big thing. And so like there are reformers out here, and then there are other people that are like, we can't do it anymore. And so I'm kind of in both camps in a sense. Like I can't, you know, somebody convicted me early on, and I do have mentors that was like, you know, if you're dedicated, and he said Black people, but I think that ultimately we have to understand that the struggle is meant to kind of split us all up so that we can't see how like it involves all of us, right? Like how the politics that affect me also affect poor white people. You know what I'm saying? And so so we're all out there, and living in San Antonio, a lot of times I deal with the politics of like the Latino community versus the Black community. And so, but we're all like, we all have a history, especially when we talk about the land and our relationship with the land and how that was the resource. Well, anyway, I mean, everybody knows, you know, we understand the history. But so basically, in a nutshell, I'm trying not to fuck with people that don't love me, right? But I'm trying to I also, you know, have an idea of like, as we get older, we have less friends, right? But at the same time, I tell people I don't have time for friends, but I got time for family. And so my contract that I'm offering people when I share space with them is very transparent. Is that like, look, either we're family or we can't really fuck with each other. And that means that like we either gonna love each other or I can't really even jump into that contract with you, you know? And so my work is there. So really that's why I'm interested in the photographic language of love. How does that work? What does it mean when you look at somebody you love? What is the visual syntax of that, right? Like maybe you look up at them. Maybe the pose or the prompt is a conversation between us. That's why I'm interested in also collective memory, which is really important to me. And so that's really what like the work that's in here. And I know we're going to get to that, but the work that's in here is a piece of collectively remembering something, right? And that's what the prompts are. So so I don't know. I know we have, you know, it's beautiful listening to you all talk about like, you know, the art institution, but I think that really what we have to understand is there's a duality, right? Like, I think we all understand that, and we're trying our best morally to function within these institutions, but we have to understand that, like, you know, these are two sides of the same coin. So, like, if we're going to function within art, art making itself creates distance from the referent, right? So if we're dealing with the body in a sense, we're already kind of, in a sense, like hyperbolically creating distance, right? And that distance is can be violent. And so we really kind of have to understand that we're playing this kind of unwinnable game at times. And I'm willing to kind of get into the muck of that, as I feel like some of us are kind of, you know, still in the phase of kind of like lying to ourselves, right, about the nature of this game. So, I mean, that's kind of where I am. But I'm just trying to make love, right? And I'm trying to make work that makes love. And that's just, or better yet, do it. Somebody said something about performance, and that's actually where I am right now at this very moment, is thinking about the politics of performance. And that's kind of where collective memory comes in, is the performing of a memory, the performing of culture, which in a sense all of us are doing as well. So I'm sorry that was long-winded. But
No.
Yeah, I mean, as Anthony brought up, kind of, you know, my work deals directly into the politics of the documentary world, where, you know, traditionally has, or I guess historically has been, you know, dominated by middle-aged white men. And, you know, those narratives or those stories being kind of broadcasted back to us has been through their gaze. So yeah, even when I started, you know, I was very intentional about kind of attacking this issue of representation, or I guess misrepresentation. And you know, my work is very personal, and I think in a way it also deals with that topic of love. You know, I feel like I've just been working on this one large project, which I think I will continue, like, always be working on, because it's like the city I love, the communities I love, that being where I was raised, you know, Black and brown communities. So I'm very intentional about who I want to be represented and who I want to show in my work, and that is Black and brown people. And it's for that purpose of kind of reclaiming our own narrative. I feel like traditionally these white male photographers have always almost exoticized us, or try to tell a story through our pain, or certain issues that they just have no experience within. So yeah, through my work, it's just like reclaiming that narrative, reclaiming that space, and letting them know that, you know, despite their privilege, despite that this medium, you know, requires an amount of privilege to even get started within, as Anthony also brought up, with you know, even an economic factor within having to buy camera equipment and all that stuff. You know, you don't typically see young Black and brown kids running around with cameras in the neighborhood. And you know, that's something I focus on as well, aside from my like direct practices, is I teach workshops with youth, and I try to bring cameras into the hands of youth, to kind of deal with this topic, and yeah, reclaiming. I think it's all about reclaiming, and kind of dismantling a bit of those structures that been put on, at least in this medium. But I think it translates into the art world in general, in different institutions.
I think arts education really is a civil rights issue, to sort of add on to what you've all been saying, because it's who is allowed those advantages. And you know, in my community in Los Angeles, there's an after school program that I support, and the goal isn't for the kids to become artists. The goal is for them to stay in school. And the kids, you know, it's an MS-13 neighborhood, and the kids who attend this after school program, 95% of them get through high school. Almost that same number go on to college. And it's like, what does it mean when you don't allow a child to not only have the resources, but the time and the mental possibility of like learning how to rotate a cube in space. It's like learning problem solving. So I think it is fundamentally a civil rights issue.
Yeah, so when you hit me up to do this project, so I live between Downey and Welton in Denver, which is the historical African American neighborhood. And I have a homeless camp half a block from me. And I'm very involved in my community. I talk to my neighbors, like we all know each other, we look out for each other. And it just like breaks my heart I think that the homeless population in Denver has tripled in the last couple months. The county just put a porta potty next to the homeless encampment, and they're actually not moving people on with coronavirus. So these series of images, some of them, so this has been an issue my whole life. One of my uncles was mentally ill and was in and out of homeless shelters. My sister Susie was in and out of homeless shelters. And back in 2008 and 2009, when the University of Colorado developed Anschutz Medical Center over on East Colfax, they went through and they scraped off a whole bunch of motels, and the motels were mostly used by all homeless people. And I just like had this sense of dread, like we already had this huge homeless population here. Where are all these people going? So if you go back, one of the images, there was this, like I focused on taking pictures of this one building called Heaven on Earth Inn. Obviously was never heaven on earth, but I have probably 4 states of seeing this building taken down. So this image, and then the one image where, I think it's the second image that you showed. I'm trying to remember.
This one?
Yeah, so they actually had everything boarded up. They did asbestos abatement. So I have images of the building completely wrapped in plastic. I also have images. So they had boarded this up, and somebody wrote they wrote no trespassing on it. One of the images I have is the same building after they boarded it up. It was just full of graffiti. Then they opened it up and they took everything out. And then so this was after the asbestos abatement. So this is like one of the last images that I had taken of the building over 2 years. So I would go out with my camera and set up my tripod and just take images of the whole building. And these are just snapshots of on film of just one portion of the building. But at the same time, so I found this photo album at a thrift store down the street after they had closed everything up. And so my sense was, when I found this album, my sense was that there were a lot of people who were living in that hotel and in those hotels that had been raised. The city was putting them up there, and it was like a long-term apartment for families. And shortly after that, like those buildings where everything was like pushed down, I found this photo album And I mean, it's pretty interesting. It's like a family's memory scrapbook. And the two photos that I chose from the scrapbook, I think this one titled Claire, I think that's the mother of the little boy who's sleeping in bed. And I think that this is Christopher Salazar, but I've been holding on to this scrapbook since 2008. And I'm just wondering if anyone in the family, like my nephews, before my sister Susie struggled from addiction problems, and she has 3 sons, and she had a massive heart attack at 55, and her 3 boys have no family photos. She lived in shelters. She was an addict. She had mental problems, and eventually she lost everything. She would get evicted and everything would just be thrown out on the street. So this to me is very personal. And like I could see it back in 2008, 2009, like what is home? For me, home has always been very transitional. But it also is like, I feel a responsibility to my community. And it would be really awesome if I actually found one of the children or grandchildren who would want this photo album.
It's a very different kind of image, and it's a very different time. This is actually, these are works that I've never shown before that are in conjunction with a project that I was telling you about that has been shown quite extensively. And these are shot between 2001 and 2005. So this is the first work I did outside of grad school. And it's from this project called Out the Window LAX, where I became really obsessed with this notion of how Los Angeles had been photographed and sort of had this imaginary of itself. And mostly the images that I had seen were kind of the Ed Ruscha, or else the kind of black and white, documentary, kind of from the outside, neutral observer supposedly. And I got really interested as somebody who grew up traveling and moving around all the time and being I'm very comfortable in and around transient spaces, because I actually do view transient spaces, and they have a different meaning now than they did before. But I used to, I'm not sure how I feel about it now, but I used to view hotel rooms as these incredibly creative spaces. I think it'd be amazing to have a residency in a hotel, because it's a space that is not defined. Some people hate hotel rooms. I walk in there and I make myself at home, and it's a neutral space into which I can kind of create and feel very comfortable. It's a sort of in-between space. It's without definition, and besides the context of the anonymity of that. Now, all of that is not, it's a different story now, and that sort of suspension of disbelief is no longer possible. But at the time when I was trying to figure out what I was interested in, and I was interested in this notion of how do you photograph Los Angeles, which was seemed like an impossible task. And so it was basically going and photographing every single hotel and motel along Century Boulevard from LAX to what used to be the racetrack, and is now, I think, has become the football stadium, with the 405 kind of interrupting this. And there were 31 hotels, and I would go in the night before, and I would stay overnight, and I would photograph in the morning. This was camera, film. I had enough for money for 5 rolls. It took me 5 years to shoot it or 4 years to shoot it, because I was, saving up, and then I'd go to the hotel room. And if you're interested, I'd like actually to update the website to show the link to see the actual photographs of these references.
Absolutely, yeah. Send it to me.
It was fun and so the images are basically through the rooms, through the windows of the planes coming into land. So you deal with the narrative within the room, you deal with the narrative that happens outside the room. And but I also was asking people to come with me to keep me company, because it was a little, some of these situations are just, it was this sort of adventure and this sort of taking a kind of break in your own city and doing this sort of staycation. And so what's been fun is that some of the people in the photographs have gone on, who are my colleagues, and have gone on to have interesting careers. And some people, So the ones that you've chose, so the first one is this woman, Jess, and this was at the Courtyard by Marriott. She's an incredible artist, and she got sick of LA and moved to Portland, but she's a fantastic artist, and I actually tagged her, so if you guys are interested in seeing her work. And the next one that I am so happy that you chose this one. I always like this one because of the kind of crazy air conditioning, of the room. This is the Crowne Plaza, and this is with Laurie Nye, who's an incredible painter and who's really having a moment now in Los Angeles. And she was my studio mate at the time. And the interesting thing about these spaces is that, there are all different kinds of spaces, the big hotels, the small hotels, and a lot of them would all look the same. You'd never know which kind of hotel you were in. This is Alice Kunitz, who is an incredible artist. This is actually just a snapshot. I haven't never printed this, so this was just a kind of crazy snapshot of the contact print. And she was doing that, like she was putting on her wild outfit performance for this video she was doing. She's an incredibly fantastic artist. And it's funny to look, and she also was my housemate at one point down the line, but it's how young we were. So these photographs have this kind of, it ended up being, the project ended up being documentary unintentionally. Like I never assumed or thought about the work in a documentary way. And now with all this time that has passed, not only is it documentary in terms of the locations, because so many of these hotels aren't there anymore. And Inglewood, which is where half the hotels were, was very different at that time. And that's totally transformed. So there's been this interesting way in which even inadvertently, it's become this sort of document of this changing Los Angeles. And then this part of it is the documentation of my community at the time, and the artists and the people that I engaged with and who I felt close enough to bring with me overnight to a hotel, And then I just wanted to talk about the nature of the hotel room. Is the most interesting shoot I had. This one friend of mine was writing about it for LA Weekly, and we get there and she's like, oh, well, what are we going to write about? And I was like, well, and this is the self-portrait I did at the Embassy Suite. Anyway, and I was really interested in thinking about like the flash and these sort of like using this snapshot aesthetic that I have, but really formalizing it and making it look very intentional and very tight. But this guy that was, my friend was like, she's like, well, I was like, well, I generally come in, I have some wine and I read, or I watch TV, or then I start writing or I start reading. And she's like, well, I can't write about that. That's not very interesting. And so we went next door to like the club. It was called the Adventurer Inn. And it was they called it Paradise in the Hood. And it was like meant for all of the international backpackers who were coming in. So there was you were always in the together zone of time. And it was interesting because I got to talk to the manager, and I was doing this also right after 9/11. I started the project before 9/11, but of course it changed once that happened, and I didn't shoot for a little while, and then I had to be very careful about not raising any alarms in the shooting. In terms of like wanting a room, I told the dumb blonde act, like, do you have a nice room that looks at the airplanes coming into land kind of thing? And anyway, talking to him was the first time I actually had spoken to somebody who understands that community, and the hotel world is a world, and all the people on the strip, they know each other, all the managers, and talking about the different level of escapism that the rooms offer, right? And escapism in terms of the first level, and this is again before the situation now, so you have to look at it in the historical context. But the first level of escapism, just like you're traveling and you need a place to stay, or you're on business with it. Because who are these people that populate these hotels and these hotels? And then you've got kind of, a little bit untoward, a little bit, people who are having affairs, or, people who, I don't want to say homeless but sort of people who wouldn't necessarily choose to go there, but need a place to go. As opposed to people who choose to go there. Then you have the next level, which is, prostitution, drug use, and then he talked about a huge problem, or he was talking about the fourth level of escapism, was the suicide rate, and that, you find how many people he's found who've, go to these hotel rooms to do that. So this sort of notion of escapism and all these different levels.
Right.
Anyway, so I've thought a lot about hotels and motels. I mean, mine's been a more romantic view, clearly, but there's still this notion of a sort of liminal space having potentially freeing or liberating effect on me. I feel very comfortable in those spaces. And so,
Yeah.
Anyway, I was happy to share this because I haven't had an opportunity to share this work, and it reads differently to me
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, sure. So this is an image from I'll say a portrait, but the nature of the portrait is actually part of the conversation. It's from a project called All We Be, and really, I guess what preempted this work was after I've been thinking about we talk about the gaze all the time, and I'm kind of sick of talking about the gaze, but it's important to talk about the viewer, and I think that that's really an important thing. Who are we making work for? And I was really tired, honestly. There are all of these things that we make as artists, and especially artists of color. We make all of this work that is just so heavy, but we only we're talking within these white boxes to white people, usually, right? Like when we talk about privilege, one of the interesting things about privilege is thinking about the fact that we still are appealing with all of these reforms, with all of these writings about museums, we're still appealing to, white people, people with money that are kind of ensconced in whiteness as a cultural non-culture. So I think it's really important that we kind of think about that. And so this work was really a work that I wanted to make with people. I wanted to make it with people for us. And I didn't want to talk about, we talk about a struggle, but we don't necessarily talk about like just living life in a sense, which can be rebellious, but even that is problematic to think about, that our everyday lives are a rebellion against oppression. Basically, I came into this work, and I'm just explaining how this work is made. I have prompts, and these prompts are really memories or ideas or kind of poetic conversations, ideas. And so this work, I was really thinking about the authority that one exacts as a lover, right? When you love somebody, when you are responsible for taking care of someone, you also have the ability to assert a certain access, and that access is a certain power that somebody that loves you gives you, and that comes from friendship and somebody being vulnerable to you. And so these sessions are usually 2 hours long, and it consists of maybe the first 30 or 45 minutes having a conversation on kind of what this idea is. And so the idea was, how you might have a friend that you need to tell something to, frankly? Well, that's what I wanted Althea to really work within. Like when you got a homeboy, a homegirl, a friend, somebody that you love, and you are telling them like, no, you need to do this, or better, the same way that our parents or other loved ones can assert to and for us. And that's where we were working to get here. But the work also deals with the access into the work only comes through the interpretation of the viewer. And that is also a certain level of conviction. And somebody talked about autonomy and agency. Well, I find that when we look at portraiture within literary portraiture, right? Like literary portraiture is this extended description. And a visual portrait is also a description. And so I'm interested in that description, but I'm also trying to break up that power over the subject. So the subject then, that's why the caption is so long, the title is so long, because the title is comprised of fact and possibility. And so it is Althea, San Antonio, 2019, is a confrontation of care and or the insight we need. And so what I'm trying to do, and what I'm working toward as an artist right now, is I want to make work with people, not of people. And I'm trying to break down the distance that the lens creates. And this is kind of a progression. I'm also in my practice, I don't feign perfection. You know, I know many of us have heard all of these trite terms and kind of phrases. And one of them that I hold on to is like, you know, perfect is the enemy of good, right? And so what I'm trying to do is just make good work. I'm trying to make good love. And so in a sense, I mean, you know, I use light, I use, you know, technique, but at the same time, I'm just trying to make some good shit. And I've always said that as an artist. And so long as I use that as my barometer, I feel that I'll be all right. And so when I say good, I don't just mean like that it resonates aesthetically to me, but it also has to have, you know, it has to be of love and transmit love. And so I'm trying to make work with people, and I'm excited about this work because it's progressing. And at the same time, I kind of feel like it's also going past like this very moment, right? Work as an artist, I think works in the past and the future. And so I feel like I'm, you know, I'm moving forward. But at the same time, as I kind of move past this work, I really feel it, you know, which to me is a beautiful, a beautiful feeling.
Yeah. So yeah, when you approached me with the concept of home, I I was trying to think of it in different ways. I think it's a broad conversation or something that could be had in a more abstract way.
Yeah, I did that on
And
purpose.
no, and I appreciate that because it challenged a bit because I do have very personal work where at first I think I was going to approach it kind of with some of the work that I do more in the community and with through portraiture as well, to kind of get that like deeper connection and deeper ideas of what like home means to um, different people within my community or to me. But um, I still take like a photojournalistic approach and have like a lot of like my entry into photography was through street photography. So I kind of dug back into some of the work that I think I had that dealt with some of the issues that we're kind of facing today, and that also kind of intersected with that idea of home. So yeah, that first image you showed kind of, as Theresa was talking about, touching on some of the homelessness issue that we have here in Denver, and I guess in Metropolis is all over. But yeah, I think this was one of those images that I kind of still come back to a lot.
Is this an actual hotel, or is it just like a billboard? What is it?
So it's a billboard outside of the hotel that's advertising like the rooms inside.
Okay.
And, the gentleman happened to be presumably homeless.
Yeah.
The juxtaposition there.
Yeah.
You know, when I do street photography, it's despite it not being like all the, you know, there's problematic issues within that, and sometimes it's not fully there with like you know, consent or kind of going into worlds sometimes that aren't necessarily mine. But I think also it has a powerful ability to, you know, bring up dialogue or have moments or glimpses into those issues. So yeah, I mean that first photo, I wanted to touch a bit on like the homelessness issue that's happening right now. That second one kind of touching on like the spiritual warfare that we're kind of dealing with as well, and also a bit kind of touching on the surveillance behind that and what privacy kind of means to us right now. With that idea of how do you feel at home or safe when you constantly feel like you're being surveilled. This image, although it wasn't captured during the pandemic, I thought it was something that, you know, resonated with that feeling that we have, I think we all have right now. Also kind of just captured randomly a few years back. But yeah, I also wanted to touch on the issues of the Black Lives Matter movement right now, and like this photo was taken January of 2019. in a neighborhood where, you know, used to be called the Harlem of the West for its rich Black culture. And now, you know, a Black family was targeted with this vandalism and that idea of like who gets to feel at home in these spaces now. You know, this could be, you know, this photo could potentially seem like it was taken or it was back in, you know, pre-civil rights or during that era, but it was in 2019, and then now kind of fast forward a year later, and we're still, I guess, talking about these issues even in a bigger platform. But yeah, I don't know. I wanted to bring together a few images that kind of touched and different little points of the issues that we're kind of facing right now, and also what does home mean within all that.
So I primarily as a painter, I carry a camera now at all times because of the phone. But I often go on these long walks and take the camera with me more because I'm fascinated with color more than anything. And so the opportunity for me for this show was to create a narrative and go through my photos and look at creating a story. So of who this ambulant person could be in this transitional space. You know, I got in a lot of trouble. I went to a wonderful school named the California College of the Arts when I first went. And Larry Sultan, who was a great photographer, was one of the professors. And in our introduction to our classmates, I said that I had written my statement about the art before I'd made the art. And he told me that I wasn't an artist. And so that tension, yeah, welcome to grad school, Larry Sultan. And I've really struggled with that tension between the stories we tell about why we make the work and then the work that results. And so this was a lot of fun. It is, for me, it literally was a series of walks that I took, but it also became a walk of a character. Moving to Los Angeles is like moving to any big city. It is very terrifying, and people come for all sorts of reasons. But I would like the idea that I was creating a character who I think is pretty clearly female, but I don't know that much about her. And so she's staying at a motel. She's trying to have some self-care. There's a swimming pool, maybe. I do have the fascination of someone who is not a dog owner with this particularly Los Angeles thing of the people who get these fancy dog poop bags. And so I was thinking about the symbology of that, of sort of the economic advantage that's very present for me in this image of someone who can afford to not only have a dog, but the dog is so precious that you would have these very nice plastic bags. And so it's, again, an ambulating person.
And they just left it there on the
side of a hike. So again, it's like imagining someone who's new to LA and sort of shocked by the difference, if the differences of socioeconomic and cultural backgrounds. And then I wanted to focus on food as the next. So like if you were living temporarily in Los Angeles, that you might have, this mysterious character might have come across some grocery store roses and it's miserably hot. And so how do you keep, both yourself alive, but how do you keep your flowers fresh in this temporary space? So I just became very interested in the idea of this character creation around who's coming, maybe not with all the advantages in the world to Los Angeles. And it was a great, if we can go back to the pillow, this one really touched me. And it says, new pillows, nuevas almohadas. And it was taken in front of a friend's condo. But I just love the idea that someone had wrapped these new pillows in plastic and left them for someone. But that idea of how do we how do we find comfort? How do we share? Who are we interacting with? Like, I do like that sense of I think it's present in everyone's photographs very differently. Is like the strangeness of photography and street photography. So.
Well, I have a bunch of exhibitions up right now. I'm in part of some group exhibitions. I'm actually really excited. I just finished collaborating with the filmmaker Kim Shively and interdisciplinary artist Alicia Ordahl, and we took an inventory of our material and visual language, and the video is currently at the Arvada Center as part of Pink Progression's collaborations. So it's an exhibition about voting rights and the civil rights marches. And I'm part of an exhibition at my gallery where I'm represented down in Houston at Gray Contemporary. I'm in an exhibition called Matter, and they have one of my huge black pantyhose stacks, things like 10 feet tall or something like that. It could be like 1,000 pair of pantyhose to make it. It's hanging up as part of an exhibition down there right now, and kudos to Mel and Elizabeth Deweese, who take all their own resources to run this gallery, to show work that's important to them. Yeah, I'm trying to think. I'm working on rejuvenating Cunt Club. So Amber Cobb and I, who's an artist in Denver, started Cunt Club as a grant-making institution, and it is part mentorship, and it's run through Redline as a nonprofit, so we can take in grants, and like, how do we meet as a club? So we pool money, and we get money through each of us, and then we also take money through Redline as a nonprofit, so people can do it tax deductible. But there's a small group of us that select artists based on the work that they do in the community. And Cunt Club is a term of endearment. Amber Cobb and I got cunt tattoos by Liz Green a few years ago. And
yeah, that makes sense for you guys, since I know you both.
she's like, yo, cunt, what's up?
Yeah.
Term of endearment, but it also is very political, and you know, not everyone feels the same way about the word as we do.
Yeah.
But like, I'm really interested in doing this work. You don't have to be a woman to be a cunt. Like, it's a term of endearment. It means I love you, cunt.
Is that where we're going with this conversation right now?
As I'm making work in like what I'm doing is like
yeah.
back of my mind.
Yeah, so I want to say again, I can't tell you how thankful I am for this. I've really needed this. I don't think I've had this kind of discussion, and I don't know how long.
Oh, well, I'm happy.
Thank you.
About that.
I'm so happy to get to know all of you. And it's inspiring, because I've been very isolated. I really am in the middle of nowhere. So what's upcoming? Some exciting news. So like I said, I've been finally stabilizing. I've been quiet for a bit. But I did get into a brand new residency at the World Trade Center that I would suggest all of you apply to. It's called the Silver Arts Program, and I think it's a kind of followed after the last one. But I can't get in, or I'm just starting to try to get in because of, you know, what's happening with Corona. But that'll be happening through the spring. So it's sort of a new beginning in terms of a new space. I did just find out I got into the first round for the Creative Capital Grant. I won a bronze part of the Los Angeles River, all this sort of beautiful flora and fauna that's in the center of the river. That'll go with the Bronze Fronds project. There's also, to be honest with you, I have so many projects I want to do, but I got so burned. It's been taking me a while to like come back to make work again because it's so personal and it affects me so strongly. So anyway, I'm falling in love with art again. So we'll see what happens.
Okay. Thank you, Zoe.
Sorry, I don't mean to get so emotional.
That's okay. I actually bring that out in people. I'll talk to people and then they'll start getting emotional and I start feeling bad. Alexandra knows because sometimes I think it's an Aries thing. We bring out, Alexandra and I actually share the same birthday.
We're the same birthday.
Yeah, the exact same day. And I think, I don't know what it is because we're not, I know for me as a person, I'm not very touchy-feely, but I'll sit down and I'll talk to people and they'll there's some emotion that comes out. And I don't know what it is. I think it's just the Aries thing. I don't know.
Yeah, currently I have a show. Part of this same series that I'm working on is up at the McNay Art Museum out here in San Antonio. I mean, there are a couple. I also have another show up. I mean, it's actually a virtual show in Houston, Texas. It's Artist for Artists, the show is called Repose. That's some of my older work. Right now, you know, it's been a good time and a hard time, just because you know we're thinking about art in the context of systemic racism, and art kind of falls into that place. And so I'm, you know, kind of talking with a lot of artists. I also teach at Texas State, so I didn't say that earlier, but which was always important to me because that kind of, like Zoe said, you know, I make work that I want to make, and that's really important to me. And there's certain privileges that I have. My partner does well, you know, so I'm able to kind of to think about what I want to make. But I'm also just trying to, I want to finish this project, this series of work that I'm making, and just applying for things. But I'm also kind of, one of the things I said earlier, that I'm interested in asking a question in good faith. And as an artist, sometimes that can be detrimental to kind of like success as we know it, kind of from a mainstream. And so I always want to be able to do that. So I'm actually interested in research, you know, and interested in kind of continuing the politics of photography. And so I'm actually applying for like PhD programs and stuff like that too. So we'll see, but I'm all at the same time, I'm very dedicated to making work that's informed by some of these questions. So yeah, as far as shows, that's the things that are up right now, and I'm working towards just really working with people, wondering if, you know, the best way to make work is outside of some of these places.
Yeah, I'm working a lot with the Latino Cultural Arts Center here that's kind of developing. We currently have an exhibition at the Colorado History Museum, kind of touching on the last 50 years of kind of Chicano, Mexicano, Latino art in Colorado. Outside of that, I had a few other exhibitions coming up with the Colorado Photographic Arts Center. I'm part of this documentary and art space called Pattern that's kind of developing as well. And we have a few projects coming up through there. But outside of that, I think my bigger focus has been kind of, I run this like family business with my parents where we sell carnitas on the weekend, and
Oh, nice.
And that's what we're doing right now. I actually got to get back to that right now. But through all that, I've reconnected a lot more with my family. So I've been exploring more of the documentation of that, and kind of going deeper into my own personal narrative and documenting my family. so yeah, that's I think where my bigger focus is as far as like making me work.
I mean,
Yeah.
after Juan started talking about carnitas, I'm like,
Yeah.
oh my God, I can only think of like, oh. When are we coming
Come
over?
by, come by. The
Oh
garage
my
is open.
God. Yeah, now I have to refocus.
Yeah.
So, you know, for me, it's like, there's just so many things going on, and what I'm trying to do is clear out the noise. There's so much noise on the Corona coaster. Um, keep clear that this is an incredibly important moment to be an American. This is the biggest civil rights protest in the country's history, you know,
Yeah.
and to ask questions about advantage and responsibility towards that advantage. I think I'm going to recommend an article because the teacher in me, Anthony, I feel you, is there's a wonderful guy named Stephen Aguilar, and he argues he prefers the word advantage to privilege because advantage lets us talk about intersectionality more than privilege does. And so the idea of how can you talk about being a sort of like a white female or a Latino male, that that there's advantages to multiple parts of our identities. And I think it's a wonderful time right now to reflect on how we interact with others, how we support others, how we love others, and how words like love have so many different definitions. And I've seen that in everybody's work here today. It's like, I can't wait to see more of your work. I'm really excited. Business, wise, I look forward, Esteban, to being in Marfa with you next April. We'll celebrate our
Yes.
birthdays together,
Yeah.
hopefully.
Anthony, have you heard of the Marfa Invitational?
No, I mean, probably, but no.
Yeah.
It's a new art fair that takes place in Texas, and it was delayed twice this year.
Okay.
So hopefully it'll be taking place in
April, right?
In April. I'm doing a solo show at Orange County Museum of Art that has been delayed since April, multiple dates. So maybe it will happen in October. But I really, for me, this is the time of curiosity, learning about other people's practices, really rethinking sort of, I don't have an end to it. It's like, I think that the experience of I'm a planner, and I like to plan and make the most out of every minute and every day, and to have every one of those plans, like every day, it's like, nope, that's not happening, And so this idea of like, what does it mean to be fully present as an artist? I'm really, I'm painting right now, and it's, I was like, I really feel like putting little stars in my drawings. Like, I just want it to look like almost like a teenager. And like part of me is like, but that's not what Alexandra Grant does, So this idea even of one's identity being fixed. So it's really having, the time to sort of play in the work.
Yeah.
That's what I'm looking forward to the most.
Yeah, I was really happy that you agreed to submit some photos, because I know that's not normally, or that's not what you're known for, I guess. Yeah.
Well, thank you for asking. No, but it's this idea of, I really love seeing when you put the website up and just seeing the engagement without knowing each other, the artists, just seeing commonalities, like you could choose a color as a thread. I love that experience that the internet offers us, right? That homelessness, thinking about issues of race and representation, thinking about love, like that there are so many threads through these 5 bodies of work. So
well, I want to thank you guys. We're about a half hour over. I'm really big on planning.
It's an Aries thing.
Yeah. So but I'm very happy that you guys spent an hour and a half of your time. I always feel very fortunate that people choose to spend literally an hour and a half of your life doing this thing that kind of came out of my head, but also knowing about you guys and your work. And I'm batting 1,000 as far as just awesome people that I've been exposed to with this work. So I appreciate you guys. It's a pleasure to know all you guys, and hopefully, you
Let's
guys
all go
will
to
keep,
Marfa next spring. Let's all go have
Yeah.
contest in Marfa, please.
hopefully you guys can maybe keep also the lines of communication between each other open, because this is part of what I'm trying to do with Peralta projects too. So